All right, back by popular demand. It's been a while, but Adam Patrick is here. What's going on, my man?
How are you, sir?
I am well. I am doing very well. How about you? Life's been busy.
Life's been busy, but life's good. It's definitely rewarding. With more power comes more responsibility, right? With more gifts comes more responsibility. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good to us.
Yeah, that's no doubt. So I had this idea, and you were the only person that popped in mind to talk to about this, was the symbolism of New Year. And with the New Year just passing, I thought it was a perfect time
Hmm.
to cover this. And I sent you a note. I had like three things in mind whenever it came to this: was observation, replication, and participation. And what brought this to mind was I just recently was accepted to the Orthodox Church,
Hmm.
and the way that we worship, they other people would look at, like Protestants would look at it and say, well, you're just replicating or reenacting these cycles. But the way that the Orthodox Church approaches it is that you're participating in the cycles, and everything's a cycle, whether it's a liturgical cycle, a daily cycle, a weekly cycle, monthly cycle, or a yearly cycle. And I started really like reflecting on the myth of eternal return by Mircea Eliade, and was thinking about that, and the way that people celebrate New Year, and the way they celebrate New Year, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, is a participation celebration in the New Year. And they're participating the birth of a new creation, with the dropping of the ball looking like a new earth coming down. And you know and so that was kind of my idea behind the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, New Year's is it's interesting, right? Because there isn't really the only thing we sort of pick the end of the calendar, right? There's no real connection to nature or the earth or any real cycle. It's just this is when our particular calendar ends. And so therefore we're gonna, I guess, use this now in the secular materialist world. We have to have something to look at to say we're going to rejuvenate the culture. You get a do-over. You can start fresh, and in the morning. Um, it's probably good that something like that still exists, although it's about as low a form of it as you can get. Right? I mean, it's the step before there just isn't ritual at all.
Right.
Which, I mean, it isn't possible, I don't think, to just have no ritual. So it's basically the bottom, right? Interesting about the you're talking about the Orthodox Church. I was actually just having that conversation with somebody on Facebook, and I wish I could remember who it was. I'd give them a shout out. But yeah, talking about participating, that the liturgy is not a remembrance, although you do remember like a historic event. But yes, it's as if you were there at that moment, participating in it when it happened, and that ritual comes straight out of Judaism, right? That's just a continuation. Christianity is just a continuation of Jewish tradition. So, yeah, it's the New Year is very. We didn't even go out. We just stayed home and watched the football. By the way, two great football games. If anybody's like into sports ball, right around here, awesome college football games that day. So, yeah,
We didn't even do that. We just sat at home.
it's dude, I mean, it's 18 years now, the restaurant and bar business, and I'm finally dealing with serving people liquids that are non-alcoholic, and I think back all these nightmares of New Year's Eves working till 4 a.m. and just
Oh
not
yeah.
remembering the next day, and no more of that. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, no,
That's my ritual.
I went to work and worked all day New Year's Eve, and then I went to the grocery store, dropped off groceries with Beatrix so she could start cooking. I went to liturgy, and then I came back home and we just hung out. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I went to bed. So
Great feeling. Great
yeah,
feeling.
it was awesome. So, but I in the note I sent you, I was talking about the chaos at the end of the year, and when you look at like the amount of depression that surrounds the holidays, it's this kind of mimetic disappointment and what has happened throughout the year. And in that New Year's celebration, it gives you that reincarnation and the renewal of spirit, to where you make your New Year's resolutions that you keep for about a week, and then you disappoint yourself, and it's downhill from there. And it reminds me of the fall. It's like you enter into that garden at the beginning of the year, and you're there, and then you eat of the fruit, and you let yourself down, and you fall once again, and you do that year after year after year.
What's interesting about that though is that's not the way anybody in ancient cultures would have seen it. That as far as I can tell, right? Just through the research I've done, as far as I can tell, there was no like lingering depression at the end of a cycle as the next cycle begins, whatever it is, whether it's the agricultural calendar that the tribe or culture was using, or the ecclesiological calendar or whatever, that there's always a sense of you're at a point and there's just another point forward. Right?
Well, aren't they? Wouldn't they have been counting down to Carnival at that point? Like for the most part, at least most cultures.
What do you mean specific? I mean, that's a specific thing. What you mean, like just a general celebration?
Well, like from what I understand, at least listening to Jonathan Pajot, that there was the a week every year at the end of the year before the renewal of a new year, that there was a celebration called Carnival that was basically like everybody engaged with the demons inside them, and like they wore a mask and just got wild, and it's kind of like what Mardi Gras would be today.
Yeah, I mean, that as far as I know, that's only like in a specific place, but I don't have a lot of information on Carnival specifically. I don't know if I see that trend kind of throughout history. I think it may be kind of localized. And of course, there is no real like one trend throughout history. I mean, different cultures have different ways of doing it. But yeah, they're at least in that case, they are recognizing a spiritual realm. And so it sounds like they'd be recognizing it in a way that's moving them in a positive direction. Right. Even the idea of like Halloween, as a Christian concept of sort of making fun of demons, right? It's sort of a similar, but then when you take all of the like the actual spiritual reality out of it, and you're left with just like naked bone secularism, it's no surprise that we're constantly looking for like a fresh start all the time, because we're so depressed and angry, and right, like we don't. I mean, this is a theme, right? Meaning and purpose in our lives, and so. It's always a new day tomorrow. It's always a fresh new year. I have my resolutions. Like, it doesn't really come from any spiritual place. It just comes from a sort of hating our world and reality and life, period. And hopefully tomorrow I don't kind of thing. It's kind of an anomaly in human history. And I certainly don't think it's a good trend.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that people are doing it somewhere, right, trying to find some positivity, but yeah, I don't think like getting hammered in Times Square and is going to lead you to have like a nice like green juice in the morning and go to the gym. It's kind of counterproductive. It's sort of like hedonistic pleasure seeking in the moment, and it's like, well, if you wanted to start something new, why are you not starting it now? Like, why do you have to wait till January 1st to do it? Why can't you do it December 20th or something, right?
There is something that is psychological about the ritual behind it. And I can't help but think that the ritual has been upheld the way it has been upheld is because of the desire for the esoteric.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, that's the is-ought problem, right? That's the whole thing. So when you have let's say a state or a government or a culture that no longer understands what the ought is that defined it and created it, and all there is the is, right? People are going to try to find an ought somewhere. I think that's, I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly what we've seen the last excuse me, the last 3 years, is just like a huge manifestation of something that had been lingering there for decades, maybe centuries. You know, that we make fun of religion, we make fun of all these deep spiritual meanings, and maybe we throw throw a couple of golf claps over it, like karma or something, something like that we can sort of get away with that sounds kind of mystical. But yeah, when you don't have the ought, you're going to start making them up. And if you don't want to believe in anything spiritual, which is where all of the oughts come from, right? It's just going to be something materialistic, and then it's not going to lead to anything. Which of course is like a self-serving prophecy, right? Because then when you don't see improvement, you're like, see, I was right. There's no way to improve, right? And people are just kind of to themselves.
I don't see the lack of ought. And that's the thing. If you talk to libertarians, the state ought not do this. It ought to be this way. It ought not exist. You talk to a communist, it ought to be this way. It ought to be that way, and so there's this, I don't know, maybe you've seen something else working in the bar industry for as long as you have, but it seems like everyone has the ought that they're clinging to, that they're hoping for.
Right. So I think what you're seeing there is exactly what we were just saying, right? It's the reason that libertarians have landed on that ought is because there is, versus the Church of Woke landing on their ought, is because the defining principles that are, let's go to the Declaration of Independence, right? It's libertarians' favorite thing. Like there's a lot of ought there. Right. And
what libertarians have you talked to?
Or, I mean, they're essentially it's well, if you're a libertarian, not an anarchist, right? If you're like a small L kind of
like Ron Paul libertarian.
Right. Okay. Like that would essentially end you back at the Declaration of Independence, or maybe the Articles of Confederation, right? And there, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Like that's an ought.
Yeah.
Right. So if you live in a culture that was defined on that, and now you no longer have that, then different factions and different groups are going to be trying to find that, how to get back there without, yes, instinctively they're going to want to get back, but they don't believe in the actual words in the original ought. So they're trying to like cram their own ideologies into it, which is why they don't work. Right. And they seem terribly unnatural. And I'm not even saying that the Declaration of Independence is like true, quote unquote, or whatever, like as some ontological reality. It just is kind of the ethos that created this particular country that the people are living in. So this kind of egregorial sort of infusion of that into the culture is there under the surface, but people don't really believe it. And so they're just flailing around with these different ideologies. And they don't work because they don't happen, right? They're destructive all the time.
Well, the problem is that there's no distinguishing characteristic between an is and an ought. And so they read the document, all men are created equally endowed by their creator, and they say that's how it is. Now I have to substitute my belief for creator, right? So yes. When I was running around agnostic, what I would always say, well, what it is saying is that we come from nature, and nature determines that people have the right to self-defense. If you look at a lion in the wilderness and you attack a lion, that lion can fight back, and that was kind of like my go-to. Now I can see the facade in that. I can see the liberation, so to speak, in the servitude to a bigger idea and a higher power, but that was a long journey for me, and not everybody's going to get there at the same pace. And so it's like they're looking for the esoteric through a Gnostic spectrum.
I think there is a lot of Gnosticism in that, right? Hidden knowledge, right? If you can just tap into the hidden knowledge. At the same time, I don't think you would get any of the folks in like the liberty camp or the woke camp who would acknowledge there's a mystical realm though. So there's no home for it.
Yeah, but
right?
they would acknowledge that there's a greater tier of knowledge. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
They're replacing the mystical for a material like explanation because they're scared to go beyond the realm of what can be proven through science.
Right, because that realm doesn't exist to them. Right.
Well,
So
it may exist to them. It's not that it never existed to me. It was just that I didn't think it was I thought it was a fallacious way of arguing a point. You see what I'm saying?
I guess there is like a tendency to sort of generalize groups as opposed to people in them, and I guess I came out of the libertarian sort of camp, but I mean I never felt comfortable there.
He was never a real libertarian.
Yeah, right. Thank goodness. Right. I mean, I think it was very easy to see that the things that were attractive in libertarianism to me were the things that I really wanted to find in Christianity when I was younger and just didn't.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was a natural, but there was a lot of really like creepy, cringe stuff there too. Like almost sociopathic kind of behavior without empathy or compassion or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know if you press each individual, where they would go. I mean, obviously you and I got out of that trap, so I'm sure many people can. But as a general philosophy, right, in order to adhere to kind of the philosophy, you're sort of ruling out several possibilities by the nature of doing it.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that I got out of the trap. I mean, I'm still at the Libertarian Institute. I still work with Scott and Patrick and all those guys at the Libertarian Institute. I think the Libertarian Institute is a different breed of libertarian, though, than what you would find in a lot of places. Maybe it's because I know those guys and I've had these conversations, and we can talk and we can disagree on things and have these conversations in fruitful ways and be like, oh, that's interesting point, yada, yada, yada. I mean, my last chat with Patrick McFarland shows that, where we weren't disagreeing, but I was bringing up points that he was kind of overlooking, and we're chatting back and forth, and we get into details. But when you look at like the kind of the cut and paste libertarian, and I would kind of like limit it to the pragmatic libertarians, really, because they have a very materialistic point of view. They don't look at morality as an objective thing and really view it from a more subjective lens, which really cuts the legs out from under, the libertarian ideal. If you talk to like a Ron Paul or a Mike Maharrey, both of these guys are very have a very Christian ideal, or even a Thomas Massey. You listen to Thomas Massey talk about his views of libertarianism. They're very Christian people, and they very much are grounded morally in that Christian ideal and build their libertarian ideals out of that. And I think that's a fair place to come from, because there is kind of a liberation, kind of a, I don't want to say theology because that goes down the wrong road. There's this kind of liberation ideal that you can take from the servitude towards others, right? That you feel like this liberation towards those people. I mean, the servitude towards your common man or your family or your community, and that then breeds out a liberation that you wouldn't find by being an atomized human being. And this is one thing that a lot of your highbrow libertarian writers like Mises or Rothbard or Hoppe would point out, that we don't view ourselves as atomized human beings. And there's been this perversion among this group of thinkers that has created this atomization, which then leads down this road of debauchery.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good characterization. There's always, I mean, every human system is going to be corrupted somehow. And there will be the gatekeepers or the guardians or the remnant kind of who try to keep it at least in some direction that it was intended to go in the first place. And then just natural. I mean, it happens in the church too. I mean, you can't get away from it. It's just a human thing. right? So yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, as I've come to understand, I mean, Western Christianity in all of its forms is congruent with libertarianism. It's just, to me, the mystical Eastern Christianity, it doesn't have any need for that, right? It's not that they're not bumping heads. It's just not. It's sort of unnecessary and irrelevant. But I mean, I think we may have talked about this, you and I, or definitely I've talked about it with somebody. But the book, How the Roman Catholic Church Built Western Civilization by Tom Woods. I listened to the audiobook several times.
I have the audiobook. I have never listened to
it. You should check it out. It's Tom Woods, so it's not, you can get through it in like an afternoon, right? I mean,
right.
And I, I agreed. I couldn't find anything in the book to disagree with. Everything in the book is accurate, right? I would just he sees it all as a positive development, and I would see it all as a negative development. But the factual information is, I mean, it's true, right? And I think it was, somebody sent it to me as a way to like convince me of something, and I'm like, no, I already understand this, right?
No. Well, ironically, you told me, if I remember correctly, because we did talk about this at one point, and if I remember correctly, ironically, I believe Andrew, a Popular Liberty, sent it to you.
Oh, that's right. You're right. Yep, you're right.
Which is a very ironic thing.
Yeah, and I remember I texted him, and I haven't talked to Andrew in a while, but I texted him and I said, "Yeah, man, I don't disagree with anything in here. I don't think any of these conclusions are."
Yeah, it's not a positive.
And he was like, "Are you sure? Did you want to listen to it again?" I was like, "No, I mean, you're right, right? I mean." Yeah, I want to go back and erase all those things from out.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, you can easily be a Roman Catholic or a Protestant, and you can find a home, especially the United States of America or Western Europe, find a home you could squeeze libertarianism in there, right? I think it's when you get to the libertine stuff that, like you were just alluding to, right? And I don't know what the pragmatic caucus. I know that's a thing, but I don't think about them.
It'd be like Justin Amash and Reason Magazine, Cato.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
those degenerates.
I mean, okay, so obviously not, right? But I was thinking the libertine, but okay, so the Justin Amash, Reason, Cato people are probably even more dangerous than the libertine debaucherous people.
Yes,
right? Because they're the kind of people who don't see anything that's happening in the world at all, right? They're so
like Sam Harris.
Like, well, I mean, honestly, I have like 4 Sam Harris books up on the top left there, but I mean,
that doesn't mean they're good for your health.
No, sometimes you have to drink poison to know what like the antidote tastes like, right? So, yeah, they easily become like the foil for their political enemies, right? And they're really like no different than the people who stormed the Capitol, right? They just exist to empower the people that they don't like.
Yeah,
a foil is the best word I could come up with, but you're better with words sometimes than I am. But yeah, they're what?
Fed.
Okay. There you go. Glowy, I think was a word.
Yeah.
Around for a while, right? Yeah, that stuff's just not helpful. If anything, it's just super harmful.
Yeah.
Not to sidetrack the conversation onto libertarians, but
No, but it's valuable because like the libertarian language is language that my audience speaks, right?
Okay.
We could go down the same rabbit hole with the communist ideals, Marxist ideals, right? Because we both read enough Marxist, literature to be like, yeah, we can see how he is taking the esoteric, he's trying to bring it down to a human level and make people the dynamics, right? And it's something we're actually going to talk about when we record here in a minute on our next episode. Is and I'll go ahead and say it, but like when you look at like the results of the French Revolution and creating the popularity of democracy around the globe, right? Well, what is democracy compared to what was existent before? What democracy said was morality comes from the bottom up instead of from God down, and therefore it deifies popular opinion or popularity, right? And so a lot of what you see with social media and TikTok and people chasing these viral videos and chasing the idea of becoming viral is they look at that popularity that they would receive as a moral, like, kind of ideal, like they're setting the morality of civilization in society at that moment in time. So it kind of, in that moment, that 15 minutes of fame makes them God on earth at some point, similar to the emperors or the kings of old.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably unavoidable as just a human instinct, but yeah, if you can probably fill that space with something genuinely loving. But yes, if you're filling it with just your, your ego kick when one of your tweets happens to take off and it goes from 10 likes to 10,000 and you're, oh my god, look at me, right? Like that's, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
funny because like Beatrix is so like inactive on Twitter. So she'll like tweet something out and she gets like 3 retweets. She's like, I've gone viral. It's like, it's just such a joke that we tell each other.
yeah, I've often said that if anything I say is ridiculously popular, I probably should think about it.
Yeah.
I probably should be like, maybe I shouldn't have said that. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah. Maybe there's something wrong with what I said. Yeah.
That's my first instinct is like, wait, 200 people liked this on Facebook. Like, maybe I should delete it. Right?
Let me read about this a couple of times.
Yeah. I must have said something wrong. There's no way it could be
wrong somewhere.
Right. And then maybe that's just a hedge against that instinct.
Yeah. I said the when I should have said a.
Yeah, man, that definite article really, really messes things up. That could come too from kind of being in the bar industry too, and having semi popularity for a good number of years and just not really liking it. Like it just felt like a burden. Like you have to watch everything you do and say so you can fit into this ideal of how people see you, and almost have to create a persona to kind of defend your actual self against it, because God forbid they don't like something about you and it pops the balloon and deflates the whole system. So maybe I'm just on guard about that stuff, but yeah, I mean, you see it everywhere. Like, and I'm not immune to it either. I mean, obviously I'm still posting I don't do Twitter, but I'm still posting on Facebook. A lot of times sort of, I mean, really like practically, I mean, I don't think of something and then just put it on there, right? I think about it for a long time, put it on there, and then somebody will kind of voice a counter opinion. If it's a really good, genuine counter opinion, like, okay, well, we could figure that out. But a lot of times it's just like blatant ignorance, and it frustrates the crap out of me. And I'll either have to block them or I just can't, like, if somebody responded to something we were saying on Facebook and just said like taxation is theft, like that's an insta block. Like I can't really, so there's still a little bit of like protectionist stuff going on there too. I hope it doesn't come across as egotistical, but at this point, like, I need to have conversations with people like yourself. I can't have them with somebody who's 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't even remember the last 3.
Right.
And there's like, dude, maybe this will resonate with you, or maybe you'll have a different opinion on it. The athletes dropping like flies meme. It's like 768 athletes have keeled over in the middle of a sporting event in the last 2 years compared to like 28 in the last decade or something. And I'm like, dude, did we just not spend the last 3 years telling you that facts and logic don't work? Like, what's wrong with you? That you can't, like, it's probably true, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that 1% of COVID, et cetera, or the hospitals. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that that people are dropping dead from the vaccination. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. The people who get it already get it, and the people who don't get it are in a freaking cult. You're not going to logic them out of that with that meme. It's just like, what are you doing? And that's another thing too. I can't. You're right. People do take their own time to come to things, but there are some things, like if you see someone get murdered directly in front of you and you just continue on about your day without it affecting you at all, like to me, that's the same thing. Somebody lived through the last 3 years and was aware of it enough to be able to put that meme up, right? They're not completely out of, like, missed the whole thing in a cave somewhere, but to just not have anything resonate and no lessons be learned from it. It's just so frustrating. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
No, I agree. I agree. And one thing that I would just say is, just because they're not where I'm at, number one, I'm not required in any shape, form, or fashion to have a conversation with somebody like that. But at the same point, I'm not going to, I'm going to trust the process that they will have the conversations necessary, just as you and I did over the last, 4 or 5 years to get to the point that they need to be at, because we don't all move at the same pace, and we got here. Right. And think about where you were, like if I think about where I was, 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, that can't be any worse off than I was, So it's kind of like an alcoholic that gets sober, right? And then you see another alcoholic. Are you going to judge that guy, or are you going to pray for the guy and just be like, I hope he finds the right way?
Yeah, I mean, right,
because it's not impossible. That's all I'm saying. It's not impossible that the mindset changes. And if it's somebody, there's a particular person in the libertarian space that is not speaking to me at this moment. And he's not speaking to me because I sent him a text message privately and said, hey, look, man, you're pissing people off. Give me a shout so we can talk about this. Because I think you're seeing this particular perspective wrong. And for years, this guy had acted as if I were a big brother to him and he were a little brother to me. And suddenly when I called him out and said, hey, I want to talk to you privately, I'm not going to call you out in public. I want to talk to you privately. Like, let's have this conversation. He got butthurt and he just blocked me everywhere. Right. And so I don't look at it as it's hopeless for this particular individual to move forward. I refuse to call him out. I refuse to, do any of that. I still, on the holidays, I'll send them Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Thanksgiving. Get no response. It's okay. I can deal with that, because I'm not going to let another person's choices affect the way that I feel about life and other people. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably one of my biggest flaws is wanting to see things repaired and healed so much that I can't stand to see that not happen. Yeah. Right. There's something about that. It's just, something as simple as holding a door for somebody or saying please and thank you or letting somebody into traffic. Like, it's such an easy thing to do that it's so frustrating when it doesn't happen. So that's probably my biggest flaw, is to not have a little bit more understanding and patience for, but it's also kind of like the flip side of that is I have, and you have as well, formed really good relationships with people we've never met. Right. I mean, for sure, I can think of like 10, 11 off the top of my head who were just commenting on a post today, who are, genuinely interested in asking questions, and they may or may not agree with me on everything, but they're genuine people who are engaging, right? That I'm being respectful, hopefully, of their time, and I believe they're being respectful of my time. I think it's more like I need to have a little bit more understanding of the mic drop moments that people try to come with. Because it's like, no, man, like we were mic dropping that like 12 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Not pick the mic up. It's not a mic drop. Right. So, and then you have to use them as kind of an example of how this works. But again, it's Facebook. So like these conversations, like we're having right now, this is ultimately what people should be driving to from those posts, right? If they're not listening to your show and they're just taking your Twitter or your Facebook or something, they're not going to get the entire Tommy. It doesn't work like that,
I don't even, well, I got kicked off of Twitter for calling a neocon a flaming faggot. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on Getter and I'm on Instagram, and I don't use any of them because I just hate social media so much. So,
yeah, I don't blame you. I
get on there every once in a while and I see to see what you're talking about, because a lot of times you're saying things that I'm like, that I find intriguing and make me think. But I every once in a while you might see me like one of your Facebook posts, but I don't do anything on Facebook.
It's definitely for the better. I mean, it's the least corrupting version of social media that I can find, that you can actually have a dialogue, because there's only so many people in real life that are just surrounding you on a daily basis that you could have a conversation like this with, right? To the point where nobody would want to be around you anymore, right? Like, my brain is flooded with all these ideas. I have to talk to somebody, and like, next thing you know, you've spent 45 minutes at a 7-Eleven talking to a homeless guy, and he like can't wait for you to leave him alone. Give you money to like leave him alone. So I think it can be good for that. It can also be addicting. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a balance there. I don't, honestly, if I didn't have Facebook, I would drive myself crazy. I'd have to do a show like twice a day, like, it's just to have a way to kind of convey ideas as they're coming, or I'd go crazy.
You could just write a book.
Yeah, I know. So I was a pretty prolific, right? Not a very good one, because I was a kid, but like, I wrote a lot when I was younger. And at some point along the line, the one thing I let technology take over was audiobooks and podcasts and YouTube. And I'm very rarely home sitting down. And when I am, I'm usually exhausted. So it's very, very difficult to read, let alone write something.
Yeah.
And like, a lot of my ideas come to me in the car. So I should have maybe like a microphone. But it's weird. Like, you ever try recording yourself when you're driving and you had an idea? It like doesn't quite work with the microphone there. I don't know why.
Yeah. You know what? There was a period early on in my podcast where I'd be driving down the road and I would use my headset for taking calls, my Blue Parrot, and I would actually record podcast episodes while driving. And I did, I don't know, 5-6 episodes like that very early on, where I would just record like little 30-minute episodes while I was driving. And you're right, they're not as effective because your attention's everywhere. Right. And so you're not really like focused on the task at hand and really thinking deeply about what you're saying. You're kind of sporadically talking and saying things that are coming into your head at the moment. But that's why they have like software like voice to text, where you can take notes like that, and you could take yourself notes, and then you could probably sit down with those notes and clarify what you mean.
Right. Yeah. Clean up all the grammar and spelling errors. And yeah, you're probably right. I probably should. I mean, I started a Substack finally. I got one article out, so it only took me about 4 years.
Yeah.
But that was kind of my quote unquote New Year's resolution, right? It was to just do something with typing on a keyboard, instead of. So I guess, we have to do the secular thing. Interestingly enough, I think today for many Orthodox Christians is what, theophany, right? Yesterday for some, today for some. And then so that's kind of like a new year for them as well. And then there's a September 1st liturgical year. Yeah. It's kind of interesting to see the different churches and how they sort of reset and celebrate. And yeah, I don't know why I didn't realize that until right now. But yeah, I think it's theophany today.
It is. Yep. It is the Feast of Theophany today. It is. I know my church celebrated last night. I was unable to get there because I ended up working so late. And so I got home and I had only slept like 3 hours. And I was just like, I'm going to eat. I'm going to have a beer. I'm going to go to bed. Like, I can't even think straight.
I really only talked to you on text since, not to turn the show into me interviewing you, but
no, that's fine.
How did that all end up? I mean, it's pretty beautiful, so you started catechesis and went through the baptismal ceremony, right?
Yeah. I was chrismated. I wasn't baptized. I was chrismated. They recognized my previous baptism.
Okay.
From when I was younger. But yeah, no, it, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. Like, my wife asked me earlier, like, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know what to tell you. It's humbling. I mean, you and I had talked about like kind of my journey and like what I was going through and, my mental blocks and all that. So you kind of have an idea what was going on with me spiritually and the way I was viewing things and the struggles I was dealing with. But like once I had cleared it up and chatted with you about it, I was on the phone with Buck earlier and we were talking about this. And I was like, like once I made the decision and and I think you and I chatted in like mid-November or something.
Mhm.
Like it was like all the weight was lifted off my shoulder because it was like, okay, I get it now. Like it wasn't until I verbalized that I got it, but then like I verbalized it and I was like, I get it. I get what I'm going through. But for somebody going through it, I don't know what to tell them. Like I just don't, other than just be faithful to the process. The process is there for a reason, and once you get through it, you'll understand it. At least for yourself. And I think
Yeah,
I think it's going to be different for everybody.
excuse me. Yeah, I mean, it's such a delicate balance there that, I usually will wait for someone to ask me a question, and then I'll say, well, listen, it's really, you should talk to the priests. Like they're the people who, because you don't want to say something wrong in that moment
Yeah.
and derail the whole process. But I like what you said about kind of trusting it. And this is something that's been fascinating to see. Everybody I'm friends with or know is from the quote unquote West, right? I've met some cradle Orthodox people, but like in my little milieu, like this thing, everybody's Western, right? So it's been interesting to see uh, people kind of like flirt with the idea of orthodoxy, but I think they are so naturally against the idea of authority that it's very hard to submit to it and just trust the process because they've been beaten into them for
I
so
think
long.
the problem is I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Daniel Patrick Harry and Posh Redneck. And Posh Redneck made a really good point. And he said, this was an older podcast. It wasn't recorded yesterday. I just ran into it. I was like, oh, I haven't heard this one yet. Let me listen to it. He said, if you go to France and they ask you your name, and then they'll ask you your pre-name, right? So when they ask you your name, they're asking you your family name, your surname, your last name. And then they ask you your pre-name, which would be, for me, Tommy, for you, it would be Adam, right? And so in the West, at least in America, especially in America, everything's so individualized. Your first name is first. Like your first name is the recognizable name that you would answer to. If somebody were walk in a room and yell out Salmons, I wouldn't turn around and be like, what? Like, are you talking to me? Like it just wouldn't even register to me to react that way. And so when you look at the Eastern culture and the Eastern Orthodox, you're really learning a different way of life. You're not learning something you think. And whereas Protestantism, which is where I come from, you're learning thought. I mean, that's what Protestantism is. It's all in your head. And if you absorb enough of it and then embody it and believe it, then it will reflect in the way you live. But this is different. It's like your beliefs come from the patterns and the ideas that you live out day to day. And so in order for it to be reality, you have to make it a reality. Kind of, I don't like to use the term fake it till you make it, but that's the best way I know how to say it.
Not a bad term in this case. It really isn't.
You're taking it in, you're understanding what it is, and you're trying to take the steps to live it as you understand it. But part of understanding it is the action that you're taking, and that you're never going to embody it like mentally. I have another friend of mine who was chrismated the same day as me, who's came from Protestantism, and he's been to every type of church, just searching for 30 years. He's been searching, just desperately searching. And he said, all the questions I always had when I would go to a Protestant church suddenly disappeared when I started living it out and understanding it through action instead of trying to comprehend it in my mind.
Yeah, I mean it's such a really is a way of life. But yeah, I mean I think fake it till you make it isn't a bad way to say it. I've said that to people too. Like the the first time I think I went to a divine liturgy, however many months ago, I came home and my girlfriend said, how was it? And I said, it's church, right? I grew up Roman Catholic. I get it. I get what's happening. It's going to take me. It's church. And she was like, oh, I kind of thought there'd be like this big revelation. And I'm like, yeah, well, I didn't grow up a Protestant, so it's not that weird to me. Like I don't know everything that's going on, but I do know that the more time I spend doing it, it it just naturally creeps into you. Like it through osmosis, it does change. And I keep telling people, if you don't put up barriers to it, it will change you because it necessarily has to. Just like if you stop going, it will change you.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you whack your head with a hammer, it'll change you. Right. I mean, literally anything you do will change you. And then people will ask, well, what am I changing into? And it's like, well, you're changing into what you were created to do.
Yeah.
It's the most natural. It's like, it's the least unnatural thing that you can do is to be like really formed in the Orthodox Church. It is like literally why you're here, which is so difficult to explain to people, especially with that, like you have to do it all. You have to do it all the way. I know many people don't. I mean, I don't yet. Right. I hope that I get to that point where I can do it all the way. I know I'm missing things. I know I'm a really crappy Christian most days, right? I should go to more services than I do. I should be a better person than I am. I should pray more, right? But I mean, again, that takes time and it takes, dedication and help. So in order for it to work, I can't, and this is maybe what rubs people in the West, atheists or even Western Christians, like this idea that if you're holding back, you're not, you can't do that. You have to let yourself completely immerse in it, and you have to kind of feel the pain of failing at it and allow that to happen so that you can heal and you can come back. It's like breaking even the alcoholic who goes to AA or something. You have to first acknowledge there's a problem,
right?
And then because if you don't acknowledge there's a problem, you can't fix it. And then you spend basically your entire life managing it. It doesn't just go away, right? So it's not like if you go to a liturgy, you're all of a sudden going to be a saint. Right. It probably won't make any sense the first time. That's fine. 10 times in, maybe you get the responses down, but you're not really quite sure what to do. And it's a little awkward. You just trust the process, because the process is, like you said earlier in the show, it's 2000 years. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. They wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work. Right.
Well, it was wild, man, because I told you, like, after you and I had that last, like, really long text exchange, I kind of had that burden like lifted up off of me. And the next day I turned on Orthodox Ethos, Father Peter Hears, which both you and I listen to pretty regularly. And he was talking, I can't remember exactly what the subject was, but I remember the line in that subject that was like, oh, okay. And he said that shame you feel is the purification. And it's it's like when you were in the military, embrace the suck, like, because that burn, that's what's making the difference, and it's like, oh, he's like, that shame you feel is the purification. That's the fire that's burning off all the crap you don't need. And that's what you have to have. And when I heard it after talking to you, like I said, I felt this peace. But then when I heard that, I was like, that makes sense. I get what's happening now. Like, I get where my mind's at, where I'm moving, what's going on. And then it was, I talked to the priest and kind of gave him kind of a idea where my mind was at. And he goes, oh, well, I was planning on chrismating you on Christmas Eve, like, whether kind of like whether you wanted it or not, kind of deal. And I was like, okay, well, and there is an amount, like you said, like the West, we we tend to shrink away from authority because of the individuality and the lack of viewing authority as legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases for good reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was there was a point where I just decided I'm going to be obedient, right? It's because what is the job of the church? As Father Josiah Trenum says, it's a hospital for the soul. And so it was like, I've engaged in the flesh my entire life, 43 years. Like, the one thing I've never had treated as possibly as it should have been treated was my soul. And so there was some pushback from me, like internally, but it was because it was uncomfortable and it was different than what I had expected to encounter. But understanding the process that I was engaging in made it a lot easier on me.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think anybody who's really, really done this, allowed themselves to kind of open up, would agree. I mean, you touch on a good point there about authority and not trusting authority in the West. And I mean, I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that pretty much all of Western authority has kind of failed people, right? And so there is this, I think, good, healthy, like, you don't want to give your authority over to Satan, right? So there, I don't necessarily think that instinct is bad. I'm just trying to recognize it as an instinct. I think the idea of like trusting
the caution, like, there should be caution when entrusting authority. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I really can't, other than, family maybe, or, a leader in the community, other than the Orthodox Church. I mean, there's not a lot of institutions that exist in the world that have like trustworthy elites or trustworthy, systems going on in them. Like they're not, like, they're mostly, I mean, the United States federal government is run by retarded people, man. Like they're not even like real human beings. Like they couldn't do anything outside of that. But if you put them in like the real world, you're like, go be productive. And like, no, I gotta go to a think tank. Like, you have to work in the office here doing like office people stuff. They're like, I don't know how to do this. So like, how could you trust them? You can't trust them. And I don't even believe, like, I'm not even that conspiratorial that I think there's a big cabal of people who sit down and like figure out what they're,
well, there is. Time Magazine wrote an article about it.
Well, I mean, they can come together and kind of like crush people because they're violent sociopaths, but like, they're just so dumb. They're naturally going to just ruin everything.
Yeah.
Right. It's just there's not even really a need to sort of even get into it. Like, you just put a bunch of, and that's not even like, I hate to use the word retarded, because if you took like 25 kids with Down syndrome and put them in Congress, they would probably get shit done.
Well, what I mean? Down syndrome kids love everybody.
Dude, I like the sweetest human beings in the world.
I've actually like done the thought experiment. Like, were we all supposed to be Down syndrome? And the fall caused us to lose that chromosome?
I've done that too. If you look, this peaceful little angel, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, dude, can I be like that? Right? No, I mean, it's a funny thing to think about, but yeah.
One of the most heartwarming stories I ever heard was about that. There's I want to say he's in Indiana. There's a Down syndrome kid in Indiana. He's like 30 some odd years old. Open a restaurant, and everybody that walks in gets a free hug from him before they go sit at their table.
Dude, it like brings a tear to your eye.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. And it's a successful restaurant too.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, that's what we just elect that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Make that guy run the country. Like, at least everyone would hug each other on the way to, nuclear war.
Yeah. He'd be hugging Putin. He'd be like, no, sir, there's no reason. We don't need all this.
It's occasionally I will think, I don't know why I was watching a documentary on Putin yesterday, and I think I said to my girlfriend, I was like, do you think what would happen if somebody just hugged Putin like in the middle of this interview? Like, just like a small innocent child, just kind of runs up with like a big grin on their face and just gives him like a big round hug in the middle of it. What, like, do you think he would like shrivel up and like, or his face would contort into some weird like geometric pattern of bone shapes? Like, they do. Oh man, I don't know if anybody needs a hug.
It's probably not as disgusting as what would happen if a child hugged Biden.
Well, there would be very different visceral reactions, I think, between the two gentlemen. And I don't think the kid in either situation is coming out for the better.
Right. Okay. So you have any closing remarks about this subject that we've been kind of broadly talking
No,
about?
it's good. It's good to just talk with you and kind of get out of that kind of social media thing and texting. I need to do it more with people. I know folks are busy and I'm busy and stuff, but I mean, as far as, for me, for ritual, it's really like, I don't, the Orthodox Church has differing opinions on quote unquote pagan or secular rituals, right? Like, I've noticed in the Antiochian or Greek tradition, like there's Christmas trees in the church.
Yeah.
Like, and then if you go to like a really hardcore Russian Orthodox church or maybe even ROCOR, you will hear, I'm not saying this is everywhere, but I'm not that experienced in that, but like if you cannot celebrate New Year's Eve, you cannot celebrate, you can't have a Christmas tree in your house. Santa Claus is off if it's not St. Nicholas, it's, and I because there are differing opinions, I like to go with mine, which is if you are just engaging in something that you don't find demonic meaning in, right? Like, I'm not going to a New Year's Eve party and worshiping the Roman god Janus, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't need to see that on like a Facebook page from a church that's the origin of it. Like, nobody knows that, nobody cares, right? No one's worshiping Janus. Right. They're worshiping money or sex or alcohol, right? So as long
which is just as bad, right?
Which is, sure, just as bad, right? But as long as like I know
there was Saturn and Plato and Mars, like,
it might even be helpful to folks to see somebody there who is coming from an Orthodox position, who is maybe not partaking in all of the rituals they are their way, but I'm also not shunning them either. I think for me anyway, that can be helpful to people. It's one of the reasons when I was originally doing the book of Genesis on the old podcast with my friend Chris, we used to swear a lot. Like, we made it a point before we did the episodes to be like, we need to be a little vulgar in here and like, make fun of the name Nimrod or talk about Abraham pimping his wife. Like, that we just do, because we could see it as being appealing to atheists.
Right.
And then over time, I decided that's not the tract I want to take because I didn't think it was being helpful to myself.
Right.
But I think the instinct to sort of not allow yourself to separate from kind of the evil around you, sort of be tough enough and strong enough and thick-skinned enough to sort of wade into it, is for me the most helpful thing in my own Christian journey. But it's also like literally the gospel, right? You're going out to people and you're attempting to live a particular way for them to see, right? And that changes you, and hopefully it changes them. Like, I'm not preaching to people, I'm just telling them how crappy I am sometimes, right? I think that's an important thing to share. So yeah, I mean, aside from the actual,
well, sometimes you have to deal with the culture on the culture's terms.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
You can spread a message and still deal with the culture on the culture's terms.
Yeah. And I mean, and I like a lot of the culture too. I mean, I'm certainly not like an alien in reality. I mean, bar and restaurant business, sports, right? Like movies, like pop culture, I'm very, very comfortable dealing with secular materialist atheists. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. Right. And I think that's when you can do that, but you can bring like a real Christian ethos to it and kind of show them rather than just talk to them. It really does help. I mean, I think it's really where, and I can't say all Protestants because that's not you can't generalize all Protestants, but I think where a lot of the evangelical thing goes wrong, and even maybe some Roman Catholicism, at least it was in my case, is there's a lot of talk and not a lot of walk. So there's not a lot of people seeing you living a particular way. And so you're really at that point, you shouldn't be doing anything. You shouldn't say anything because you're just hurting your own cause. You're being your own foil. So, I haven't seen that yet really in the Orthodox Church, but again, I'm new to it. I'm sure it exists. It probably exists more outside of converts because you grow up in something, maybe you get comfortable. But I think also folks come from an Eastern phronema and so that's not necessarily in their background. But I guess we'll see as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of wrap up. I mean, I don't have anything to plug. People can check out the Age of Information, theageofinformation.com, or just search for the neon green cross Age of Information on any platform or whatever. I try to get shows out every now and then.